In a prior program, I was talking about the Exodus and it was Thomas Mulvaney's video, Patterns of Evidence. And he was going to, I believe he's going to make a video trying to argue that the real Mount Sinai is actually in Saudi Arabia. But before he began his series, he realized that some notable scholars, influential scholars, were saying that the Exodus never occurred, that Moses is a fictional creation, that the story was invented in the Persian period, or almost the time of the Greeks started their empire, that Ezra or someone like that just made the story up. Now, most scholars and historians believe that there is truth to the Exodus story, but outside of the Bible, and the Bible is an important source, where's the evidence, the solid evidence? And I've done a lecture, and I'm going to do another one about archaeological and historical proof of the authenticity of the Exodus account. But one of the problems we have, this is a very serious issue, right? The accuracy, the truth, the reliability, the factual nature of the Bible is being brought into question. Did the Exodus occur? Some scholars, maybe it's an extreme position, but it's out there, are saying that it didn't happen at all, that this story is just invented out of whole cloth by Ezra or someone else, around 400 BC. And the Exodus is believed to have occurred in the 12 or 1400s. And that's what I want to talk about, because this is a very important issue. The veracity of the biblical story is under attack. And one of the issues we have, and I talked about this in the prior lecture, is there's like almost 20 pharaohs who are suggested to be the pharaoh of the Exodus. And there's 10 sites that are, oh, this is the real Mount Sinai. No, this is the real Mount Sinai. No, that's the real Mount Sinai. So we have like 20 pharaohs, 10 Mount Sinais, and there's like, where did they cross the Red Sea? There's about 5 different locations, on the Mediterranean coast, on Lake Timsah, on the northern tip of the Gulf of Suez, the Straits of Tiran, or Nuweiba. And there's actually other theories beyond that. They're all over the place. So what I'm saying now is, look, we need to get serious about this, and we need to look at what's the most likely, right? If there's a extreme theory or a theory that's got holes in it, because if you have an extreme theory or a theory that's not accurate or true, that even scholars don't take seriously, you're not really helping us defend the truth and reliability of the Bible when we have a lot of theories we're all over the place. So what I'm saying is we need to look at the evidence and find the strongest contenders and get serious about proving the Bible story true. It's important. The story of Moses is foundational. So I don't advocate it, but we have this, it's actually a good article. And back in the day, I think he had Herbert W. Armstrong. And he's non-Trinitarian. I believe in traditional Christian and biblical orthodoxy. So I look at that as a religious group outside of normative biblical Christianity, if you will. But they were dealing with the questions of Mount Sinai in Arabia. And it's actually a good article, which I'd recommend. It's by Christopher Eames from 2021. Where did the Red Sea crossing take place? But I don't want to talk about that right now. What I want to talk about is ASOR, that's American Society for Oriental Research. And this is from the February 2023 edition, volume 11, number 2, an article by Julian Cooper, entitled The Earliest Mention of the Place Named Sinai, The Journeys of Kheti. That's Khety. So what this means is the name Sinai has been identified in an ancient Egyptian inscription And using this inscription, we can identify the region which was Sinai. So this is important because here we have an Egyptian using an ancient Semitic word for this region, and he describes where this region is. So we have an ancient Egyptian account telling us where we should find Sinai. And I want to read this article. I think it's very important. This is not really a new discovery. It's made by Howard Carter, who's the same person who discovered King Tut's tomb. What happened is there's like a scholarly convention among Egyptologists of how to write certain sounds in Egyptian. And so what happened is they used the TJ letters, two letters, to approximate this certain sound. And what happened is Sinai is a Semitic word. It's not an Egyptian word. And so these Semitic people, these Arabians and nomads in the Sinai Peninsula, Semitic people, are saying Sinai, Sinai, Sinai. And the Egyptians wrote it the best approximation that they could. So since the spelling is not Sinai in Egyptian, but something else, they didn't identify, until this scholar looked at it, they didn't identify the word Sinai correctly. Sinai is written on this monument in the tomb of Chiti. What is his name? Chiti, yeah. He wrote about his visit to Sinai, and he uses the word, an Egyptian form of the word, the Semitic word Sinai. So let's look at this, and this is around 2000 BC. This inscription is dated too. So this is, like I said, biblical scholars are divided. I mean, those who accept the accuracy of the Bible are divided when the Exodus took place. If it took place in the 1200s or the 1400s, right? So this is before both of those dates. And I believe that any date that's not in the 1400s or 1200s for the Exodus probably should be dismissed. I talk about my criterion in the other lecture. Well before Moses ascended, quote, Mount Sinai, and received the revelation from God, Egyptian officials penetrated the rugged vales of the Sinai Peninsula in search of minerals, chiefly copper and turquoise. One Egyptian official traversed the peninsula more than any of his compatriots. Keti, a, quote, seal bearer and overseer of quarries, lived in the Egyptian 11th dynasty, which is circa 2150 to 1990 BC. So there is a region in the western area of Mount Sinai where the Egyptians would have expeditions like once or twice a year during certain mining seasons where they would go and mine in the southwestern region of Sinai. There's also an important mine that's a turquoise and copper mine up in it was today is the Negev in Israel. They had Timnah, which is a copper mine. That's where the Israelis have the Pillars of Solomon archaeological and nature park, where you can see the so-called Pillars of Solomon, where Solomon's mines are, and King Solomon's mines, and there's a replica of the tabernacle there because an Egyptian temple, I think it's to Hathor, and a tabernacle, probably used by an Arabian tribe, with a brass serpent was found. So Timnah is a very important archaeological site. So our knowledge of Keti's journeys begin with the famed Howard Carter. Before Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings, he spent time digging in the nearby necropolis of Barabi on the Theban mountain. In the 1913 to 1914 season, that's, I think, when he discovered 1922. So this was like less than a decade before he discovered King Tut's tomb. He excavated Keti's tomb and unearthed several inscriptions from the doorway, including a rectangular limestone stela that stood to the left of the tomb entrance. See Figure 1, which I'll show here. The task of translating the text was given to philologist Alan Garnier, who published it in a short article entitled A Tomb of a Much-Traveled Egyptian Official in 1917. I want to get a hold of that article. So, Sirbet el Kadim is the main site of Egyptian mines. And as I mentioned in the other lecture, this is where our alphabet came from, because you have these Canaanite Semitic slaves being used by the Egyptians. They're speaking Semitic language and they're trying to run a mine, and they needed to have writing. And the ancient Egyptian system is too cumbersome, over 200 letters just to read it. There's over 1,000 symbols, or hieroglyphs, right? So they invented the letters of our alphabet, deriving certain, like mem is, the waves of the water. It's from noon in Egyptian. So they used the Egyptian symbols for their own language, their own purposes. And they made an alphabet of about 20 languages, which is the basis of the alphabet we use today. So it's a big innovation in the Egyptians' minds in the Sinai. So let's look at Keti's exploits in the Sinai. Garnier noted that the exceptional nature of this so-called much-traveled official, who boasted of his journeys to distant desert quarries and mines. So this is in the south of Egypt. This is a long way from Sinai. Such exploits are often described in Egyptian tomb biographies, but Keti's biographical text includes unparalleled detail due to the specificity of the places which he mentions, which includes his inscription of Sinai, right? So it's very, very significant. His travel narrative opens with a general statement. I am a God's seal bearer in making powerless the hill countries. When I was in Bayou, B-I-A-U, I inspected it and traveled around the hill countries of Shinet. So this would be Sinai. They add an T. It's a grammatical suffix, right? The T in the end. So this is the word Sinai. So it should be S-N-H, Sinai, but they added T to the end. And because they're using hieroglyphs, this man, Keti, he used the Egyptian symbol for TJ, is how the scholarly convention is to use the English letters, TJ, to approximate this Egyptian sound or hieroglyph. Keti, so that's it, that's Sinai right there. We'll see this a little bit more. Keti subsequently proclaims other general exploits: his excavation of mining shafts, his vanquishing of his Asiatic enemies, which are Semitic people and Canaanites, right? And later his procurement of precious materials and metals from specific places. Turquoise from Heretutet, copper from Bat, Menkai, and Ilui, galena, Egyptian eye paint, from Kibu, and staves from Rasha'at, among other exotic resources. Some of these places can be located with confidence due to their mention in other texts, or as the known location of minerals. All of them are in the southern Sinai Peninsula or adjacent shores, but other place names are unknown. They, with the word for Sinai, which is Chidinhet and Ililu, they record names from foreign languages. It is Tijinhet, which interests us here. That's how it's written, but it's probably pronounced Sinite. Keti's opening statement, his inspection of Bayou and traveling around Chizinhet, which is Sinai, acts as a frame and heading for subsequent travels. Bayou, literally mining country, is the regular Egyptian word for the entire copper and turquoise mining area of southern Sinai, where Egyptians journeyed regularly since the early dynastic, which is 3100 BC. Unlike Bayou, the name Chizinhet, or Sinai, has no meaning in the Egyptian language. It's never been encountered again in attested Egyptian text. That's part of the reason that was the spelling of Sinai, and the scholars didn't catch it until now. And one of the problems is it's so obscure, and this word is not used in any other Egyptian text yet discovered. So, as a foreign word, the name almost certainly stems from a locally spoken Semitic languages. Semitic speakers are well known in the Sinai Desert and from their mining expedition. So let's look at TNHT, or actually it's, that'd be TJNHT. So that we got the letter T with a line under it. That's going to be a Semitic S, so Sinai, with the T added because of how Egyptians spoke it. They added that suffix. The puzzling place name on Keti's stele is spelt in Egyptian hieroglyphs as follows. The first 4 signs are consonants, and the last 2 signs are non-phonetic classifiers that tell the reader that this place name is in a foreign land. The name is transcribed as T with underline NHT in Egyptological transliteration. Regularly in standardized translation is TJENHET. The Egyptian T underline represents a sound close to the ch sound in chip, usually transcribed as TJ by Egyptologists. In trying to find a Semitic etymology for this place name, one is presented with a problem. There is no such ch sound in Semitic languages of the Levant. However, analyses of hundreds of Semitic loanwords in Egyptian text shows that the Egyptians did use their T underline. They used this hieroglyph to transcribe a Semitic sound, namely S, the sound represented by the Hebrew letter Samak. The reasons why the Egyptians used their letter T underline for the Semitic S are complicated, but most linguists conclude that the sound of the Samak letter or sound in Hebrew, the Hebrew language, or Canaanite, or the Semitic languages, probably had an original and older pronunciation sounding like TS and cats. So it's Sinai, all right? Sinai. And the Egyptians used a T for the S. By the time of biblical, okay, so that's what it sounded like, TS, like cats, Sinai. So that letter later shifted to S by the time of biblical Hebrew. But to Egyptian ears, this old Semitic sound sounded close to their T underline, right? So when Keti's scribes and his biographers transcribed TNHT, they probably heard something like Sinai, the T in the end. As time wore on, the sound shifted. Such a name would later be pronounced as Sinite. The final consonant T in this place name is a suffix, a common element in Bronze Age place names across Canaan and adjacent lands that is often dropped by the time of biblical Hebrew. Taking all this into account, the later pronunciation of Sinai recalls the biblical name, the name Sinai, in Hebrew Sinai. The reason why this equation of TNHT equals Sinai has escaped notice of Egyptologists and biblical specialists alike has to do with the ways in which the place name is generally transcribed in Egyptian translations as TJNEHT or Then-het. So it's either TJNHET or THEN, Then-het. A pronunciation seems wholly alien to any Semitic language like Hebrew. So it should be Sinite, but they write it as Thinet or Chinet. So it wasn't without without experience in studying Semitic languages and linguistics and how certain sounds change in time or were approximating the Egyptian. They didn't realize this, so they're reading Sinai and they didn't know it. Keti's Sinite was a large and mountainous land which one traveled around, Deben, a rare verb choice which stresses its expanse. It is large enough to contain multiple Kaset or hill countries, echoing the biblical Hebrew expression like Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, or Minbar Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai. Later in his biography, Chete describes the procurement of copper and other precious materials from specific mines, meaning Shinet or Sinai likely designated the parts of the modern Sinai Peninsula from where these materials could be obtained. So he's talking about this mining region, the larger mining region, and that's what Egyptians were going to the south part of Sinai for, right? So that means Shinet likely, or Sinai, likely designated the parts of modern Sinai Peninsula from where these materials could be obtained. This would include nearby Egyptian mines, as Egyptians in quotes, at Serebit el-Kadim, Bir Nasib, and Wadi Magara, but also the hills further east near St. Catherine's Monastery, where Ishaq bit Ariah identified mining and smelting sites at places like Wataya Pass, Wadi Ahmar, and Wadi Samra. Like the Egyptian expression bayou, Chinat, or Sinai, must refer to the southern parts of the Sinai Peninsula that contained mineral wealth. The reason why this toponym occurs only once in attested Egyptian text is simple. It was a foreign word for the larger reaches of the peninsula. When the Egyptians journeyed to Sinai, they visited only those mines around Serebit el-Kadim and Wadi Magara, calling the area Bayou. Keti, stressing his pioneering, seems to have traveled there, but also beyond these lands, recording Egyptian-controlled mines as well as mine sites with foreign names like Eliu. The location of the biblical Mount Sinai. So this is the conclusion to all of this. What can the mention of Sinai in Keti's biography tell us about the location of biblical Mount Sinai? The location of this sacred place is one of the most thorniest problems in historical geography of the Bible, and has been debated for centuries. James Hoffmeier's book, Ancient Israel and Sinai, The Evidence for the Authenticity of the Wilderness Tradition. I want to recommend Hoffmeier's works. There's Ancient Israel in Egypt and Ancient Israel on the Sinai. Both books are the best scholarly books written on the historical reliability of the Exodus account. So as a crescendo of the Exodus story and the place where Moses received the Ten Commandments, the modern location of the sacred mountain is of obvious importance to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. But the tradition of locating Mount Sinai, the Hebrew Bible, or Mount Horeb, which is also called, with Jabal Musa, the modern Mount Sinai, only goes back to Christian times, 4th century AD. This has worried many scholars who saw such an equation as anachronistic invention of Christian monks and pilgrims, with no earlier material or proof for a local pre-Christian tradition at Jabal Musa. As a result, alternate proposals have proliferated and gained in popularity, with some locating Mount Sinai in the northern parts of the Sinai Peninsula, the Wadi Ariba, Jordan, and even in Saudi Arabia. I was reading a book about Mount Sinai, and I think Jabal Sherbol's actually has ancient inscriptions in it. The problem is when they built St. Catherine's Monastery, it's very likely that the Byzantine emperor's envoy is there doing his business building this monastery, preparing this sacred place. They probably erased all they probably couldn't read the inscriptions, but they might have thought some were pagan. So probably all the ancient inscriptions on Mount Sinai, unlike the other mountains in the region, were erased by the Byzantines. That's what somebody. So if there were inscriptions that identified this, the Byzantines probably erased them over 1,000 years ago. While it's difficult to link two place names separated by more than 700 years, the phonetic and geographic similarities between Chinat or Sinai and Sinai would be amazingly coincidental. So it's saying that this is the most likely explanation. This is how they wrote Sinai in Egyptian hieroglyphs, right? If Keti's Chinet, that's how you pronounce it, is an earlier form of Sinai, then this suggestion supports the orthodoxy, he says, to excuse the pun, of early Christians who located biblical Mount Sinai in the southern parts of the Sinai Peninsula, be it Jebel Musa or any nearby peak like Jebel Sherbrel or Jebel Katrina. It is worth recalling that place names are stubborn and tenacious elements in language that can survive for a long time with little change. So the thing we also need to remember is you can't always put a lot of credence in oral tradition, but sometimes you have a historical memory where a place is known and it's the knowledge of the place is passed down for generations, especially at sacred shrine like Sinai. So it's doubtful that the Christian monks there just made it up. They're probably going on even oral traditions that we don't have any surviving written records, or we didn't interview the people that, we don't know why the monks chose this location, but they could have been based, they could have had very good reasons for choosing those locations. So it is worth, as he says, it's worth recalling that place names are stubborn and tenacious elements in a language that can survive for a long time with little change. Like take for example in Istanbul, Constantinople, you can still hear the similarities if you think about it. Kandahar, Alexandar, right? So even though in those cases the language has changed, you can still identify the original. It still evokes the original names of places, right? So those are places that are probably deliberately changed. But what about places that weren't? It says here, many other Semitic names, place names like Ashkelon or Pella, are similarly recorded in Egyptian documents of the Middle Kingdom and survive in similar phonetic form to this present day, lasting for over 4,000 years. For instance, I think we have the Shishak. It describes all the places he conquered in Israel and Judea, and many of those places are mentioned in the Bible and pronounced similarly. So, simply put, when Kete journeyed to the mining country well before Moses tried its mountains, the local people probably already called it. It says, well, he didn't say probably, it says, simply put, when Kete journeyed to the mining country well before Moses tried its mountains, local people already called this mountain something close to Sinai. Another implication of this equation is the etymology of Sinai. One of the most commonly espoused origins for the name is a link to the Hebrew word Shinnah, bush, an idea that finds its origin in the biblical narrative itself regarding the famed burning bush from which God spoke to Moses. Although many other etymologies have been proposed, such a link to the wilderness, such as a link to the wilderness of sin, right? The bush etymology is perfectly supported by this transcription of Tehet. Although it can only be guessed how a series of sound dialect changes may have later reproduced a name like the Hebrew Sinai. So this author, Julian Cooper, is an Egyptologist from Macquarie University in Sydney and United International College Beijing Normal University, Zhuhai in China. He is the author of Toponymy in the Periphery, place names in the Eastern Desert, the Red Sea, and South Sinai in Egyptian documents from the early dynastic period until the end of the New Kingdom. I'd like to get the entire inscription by Kete and read it for myself. Probably be difficult tracking it down. It's kind of amazing we have these important inscriptions, like the Solid inscriptions. And so the Solid inscription mentions the King Amenhotep III, the father of Akhenaten, who was Amenhotep IV. He's boasting of the foreign people he conquered. There's various Bedouin tribes, which they called Sheshu, and he mentions that he conquered the Sheshu of Yahweh. But I was looking at that, someone's trying to, how do you identify where this tribe was? Probably in Arabia and probably near Sinai. But how can you say for certain? And another interesting thing is the Merenptah monument where he says, Israel is no more, his seed is not. And it mentions other places, and it's like, can this monument help us identify where is he placing Israel on a map somewhere? I don't know if these inscriptions could be used that. Now, this one by Ketty probably could. He is describing a region. He's not just listing the names of enemy tribes or people he's conquered, like Merenptah did, or Amenhotep. So anyway, both of these are, when you see things like that, it's like, well, I like to read, the whole inscription, and it's like only the relevant section is easy to find. The rest of it's a little more difficult. And the thing is with the Soleb, if you look at the Temple of Soleb, where you find the name Yahweh, it's on a column, and probably the names of these nations. They might have had them on the base, but they might have had inscriptions going higher on the column. They're broken off, so they don't have the totality of the inscription to reconstruct everything as it was originally inscribed by this king who built this temple in the outskirts of his empire to show the Nubians that he's powerful pharaoh controlling their territory, not to mess with him. And this is his Hebseb temple, or Ahebsib, and that's a jubilee. Like when you rule for 30 years, you're supposed to build a temple and do feats of strength, jog and lift weights and stuff to show you're still vigorous enough to be the pharaoh, right? This man who has not abated any bit. That's the Hebseb ceremony when he reached that stage in his reign. So this is important, and I think it lays to rest the general vicinity where Sinai was. And the thing is, though, there's still, this narrows down our contenders for Mount Sinai. And when I was looking at this morning, I was looking at these different contenders. You have Jabal Shin Bashar. It's like, I think that's too close to Egypt proper. And I just think if you use the text of the Bible and logic and think about things like logistics of moving all these people, how far they went, I think that the traditional Mount Sinai has got to be, it's a major contender. There are other, like Jabal Sherbal, Jabal Salaf, there's other mountains in that region, but it's got to be one of the mountains in Sinai. This inscription proves it. And I was talking to Steve Wondering, this Egyptologist I worked with when I was in Egypt. He said, well, one of the things that's unique about the traditional Mount Sinai is there's like underneath the mountains, a large valley where you could have a large encampment for thousands of people, the tribes of Israel, like tens of thousands of people. And none of these other proposed locations has a region or area, a valley like that beneath it, because the Bible says that they encamped in an area below the mountain, and none of these other proposals actually have a site like that. So honestly, like I say, you do have Jabal Sherbal and others, but I believe, this is my opinion, and maybe I should bump it up, but I would say that there's a 60% chance that the traditional Mount Sinai is authentic. But with this new discovery, I can bump it up to a 75% chance that the traditional Mount Sinai is authentic. It's supported by this ancient inscription, the ancient evidence, and also, like I said, by logic and plausibility, based on how the Bible describes it. That's another thing. It's like, and we looked at it this morning, with Mount Sinai in Arabia. That leaves the conclusion that the Israelites traveled farther going to Mount Sinai in 50 days. They traveled farther in 50 days than they did in 50 years, or 40 years, I mean. It doesn't make any sense. Like I said, we got to follow the authority of the Bible. People get their pet theories, and we have to go where the evidence leads. And in conclusion, this is a very, very important issue. We're talking about the accuracy, the dependability, the validity of the scriptures. The story of Moses and the Exodus and Mount Sinai is foundational. It's important, and we got to be focused on the evidence and establishing and defending the truth of the Bible. And if you have these outlandish theories that are impossible It's a distraction. And we need to, this is a serious issue. Certain scholars, I think well-reasoned scholars might, well, this is an ancient account. There's probably historical truth to it. They might not be willing to say that everything in the Torah happened as it's written, but they believe that the gist of the story is true. That a group of Hebrew slaves escaped under Moses around 1412. That's not implausible, right? But people like Finkelstein, this Israeli archaeologist that hates the Bible, what it represents, he said, no, this didn't happen at all. It's just concocted story that never happened. It's just something fabricated, something produced by the imagination of Ezra. So that's important. Jesus appeals to Moses. When Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration, who appears with him? Moses and Elijah. This is very important. It's pivotal. And we got to focus on the evidence and go where the evidence leads. And now we have an important, renewed discovery that we have in the Egyptian text that does mention Sinai. And scholars were thrown off by the spelling, but if you apply the principles of linguistics, you're able to reconstruct that they mispronounced that word based on how they spoke their language, how they heard other languages. And this man did go to Sinai. He wrote about it, and he tells us where Sinai is. So it's settled. Sinai is in Sinai, not in Arabia. Well, Paul says that Sinai is Arabia. Just we got our modern political boundaries. And even today, Egypt is now part of the Arab world. Sinai has always been inhabited by Semitic people. People speaking Semitic languages closely related to Canaanite, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and Arabic. I'll talk about this in other lectures. Like I said, I met Ron Wyatt. He's well-meaning. Maybe he had some insights here and there. But he wasn't an expert. He wasn't trained in the field. He's a nurse anesthesiologist. And one of the things about Ron Wyatt is he discovered everything. People have been, serious scholars, certain discoveries have eluded them all their lives. And so an amateur, a nurse anesthesiologist can find evidence, find the Ark of the Covenant, find Noah's Ark, find the real Mount Sinai. And serious scholars have devoted their lives to understanding the Bible and improving its trustworthiness. And they weren't able to make all these, great scholars who contributed mightily to our knowledge of the Bible weren't able to achieve all the great exploits of Ron Wyatt. Look, I know sometimes scholars look at Finkelstein, right? The guy's an evil reprobate. But we need to realize that I think we should consider not all scholars are bad, right? I met Dr. Hoffmeyer, and there's certain things with Dr. Hoffmeyer. His two books on Egypt are the best ones out there. But he doesn't believe in the documentary hypothesis. And I just think it's inescapable, honestly. I think that there were 4 different accounts of the Exodus, and that Ezra did take these ancient accounts and made a harmony of them and put them in the form of the Bible as we know as the Torah today, using much ancient sources that go back to the time of David, and even before that, ancient writings, some of them written by Moses himself, taken by Ezra and harmonized into the Torah as we have it today. And actually, if you look at Richard Elliott Freeman's work on that subject, there's some questions that arise, but I think that it proves the antiquity of these texts. So if the documentary hypothesis is correct, we have in the Bible ancient texts going back to ancient times, to the period of Judges. Some like the Song of the Sea, at least they would concede goes to the time of Moses himself. So this theory, actually, Finkelman's, the Bible's not true. And Richard Elliott Freeman wrote a good book on the Exodus, but he's a moderate. I'm a biblical literalist, and there are certain proposals that Freeman puts on the table I strongly disagree with. And he does put together a lot of compelling evidence and organizes it. But freedom is not a biblical literalist or a somebody who believes the Bible is literally true, but he believes the Exodus happened, and he realizes that we have to, as scholars, defend this truth. I think he does believe it. I think believes the spiritual truth of the scriptures, honestly, but and from my point of view, he's a moderate. He's not doesn't interpret the Bible, look at the authority of scripture the way I do. But even though I disagree with him, even though he's moderate, I understand the importance of his contributions, even though, like I said, some of his contentions I don't agree with, because he's like Richard Elliott Freeman does is one of the perplexing questions. And I'll have to talk about this in a different lecture. And scholars wrestle over this. The idea that 2 to 3 million Israelites fled Egypt, that means that the Hebrews have been the majority population in Egypt and one of the largest populations in the world at that time. So a lot of scholars look at that and say we're mistranslating. It's not 600,000 men, it's 600 camps, right? Where the aleph doesn't necessarily mean 1,000 in this context, right? Semitic languages, they have these consonant roots, they add vowels to them, it's changed the meaning of the words. Maybe we're mistranslating it. So that's an issue. So that's a big issue. Because, like I said, there's certain non-Christian scholars, okay, let's look at the Exodus account, and they're willing to accept the gist of it. It's like, they'll say that's not possible for 6 million Israelites, for 3 million Israelites to have been enslaved in Egypt and have left. That's just, the numbers are too large. And it's like, this person's like, I want to accept the truth of this story, but they can't accept that. It's a difficulty. A lot of people wrestle with that. So the problem with Richard Elliott Freeman, he just tosses it out. Oh, don't worry about the censuses, the numbers. That was something to add extraneously later on. It's like, look, you believe the Bible's the Word of God. You can't dismiss, just vast sections of the Torah just like that. Maybe he's comfortable doing that. I'm not, because I do believe in the truth of the Bible and it has to be defended. But what I am showing in this is that we need to get serious about defending the historicity of the Exodus account, and we need to establish the evidence for the Exodus, go where the evidence leads, be true to the Scripture, but also true to archaeological evidence. And I'm going to do a new program on the top. I might expand it to like 15 archaeological evidences of the historicity of the Exodus account. And this is a profound new discovery, naming Sinai and describing where it is. Very important. So please stay tuned to other programming as I examine the story of Moses and the Exodus. Thank you, and God bless you.